In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, there is a woman who turns 68 this spring. She has spent every morning of her adult life outdoors, hanging laundry before sunrise, working a kitchen garden through the summer heat, driving a buggy under open sky in all four seasons. She has never worn SPF. She has never owned a vitamin C serum, and her skin, by every reasonable expectation, should be mapped with dark spots. It is not. That contradiction is not an accident, and it is not genetics. It is a morning habit that costs less than $2 a month and has been practiced in these communities for generations without interruption. Before anything else, I want to be clear about what this channel is and who it is for. Not for women who want a 10-step routine, not for women who are still loyal to the brands that have been selling them the same reformulated promises since the 1990s. This channel exists for the woman who already suspects that the most effective knowledge was never meant to reach her because there is no margin in it for the people who would have to sell it. The methods I'm sharing here are inspired by traditional practices of Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. These are not people who are trying to be different. They are people who simply never allowed a marketing cycle to interrupt what worked. To understand why dark spots form the way they do, you have to go back to the skin itself. Melanin is the pigment that gives skin its color, and it is produced by cells called melanocytes. Under normal conditions, that production is regulated a little more in summer, a little less in winter, largely even across the surface. But as estrogen levels drop after menopause, that regulation weakens. The melanocytes become erratic. Sun exposure, heat, friction, even chronic low-grade inflammation in the skin can trigger localized overproduction. The result is what dermatologists call hyperpigmentation, and what the rest of us call age spots, liver spots, or sunspots. They are not a sign of damage done in one summer. They are the accumulated result of an inflammatory process that the body in its 50s and 60s is no longer suppressing the way it once did. The question worth asking is not how to bleach them after they appear. The question is why some women do not develop them in the first place, or develop so few they are barely visible despite decades of outdoor exposure. The answer has almost nothing to do with sunscreen and almost everything to do with what happens inside the skin at the cellular level before the spot ever forms. Here is the number that changes everything. The primary active compound in raw apple cider vinegar, acetic acid, has been shown in peer-reviewed research to inhibit the enzyme tyrosinase. Tyrosinase is the enzyme that catalyzes the production of melanin. Without tyrosinase, the cascade that leads to a dark spot cannot complete. The Amish women in Holmes County have been diluting raw apple cider vinegar in water and applying it to their faces as a morning rinse for as long as anyone in those communities can remember. The cost of that bottle, used daily in a diluted application, is roughly $2 a month. This is not folk magic, it is enzyme inhibition. The mechanism is the same one targeted by kojic acid, one of the most common active ingredients in pharmaceutical-grade brightening treatments that retail for $80 to $120 per ounce. The difference is that kojic acid is a patented process derivative. The acetic acid in raw apple cider vinegar is not patented. It cannot be. It has existed in every culture that has ever fermented apples, grapes, or grain. A woman in Holmes County, 63 years old, mother of 7, has used the same diluted apple cider vinegar rinse every morning for over 30 years. She told a researcher who visited her community that she learned it from her mother-in-law, who learned it from hers, and that it was always spoken of the same way, not as a beauty treatment, but as basic hygiene. Something you do before your face meets the day. She spends approximately $1.80 a month on it. Her skin tone is even, her pores are visibly refined, and she has 3 children who are now grandmothers themselves and have not deviated from the practice. That continuity is the thing that should give you pause. When a method survives 3 or 4 generations in a community that has no commercial incentive to use it, no influencer pushing it, no algorithm rewarding it, it survives because it works. Now, let us talk about the part of this story that is not accidental. Because there are specific documented reasons why a $2 morning rinse is not something you will hear recommended in a dermatologist's office, and those reasons have a paper trail. The modern cosmetics regulatory system in the United States was last substantially reformed in 1938 that year, under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For 84 years, until a limited update in 2022, The framework that governed what goes on your skin was essentially unchanged. No meaningful pre-market safety review. No mandatory reporting of adverse effects. A system built before synthetic fragrance, before petrochemical emulsifiers, before the entire architecture of modern cosmetic chemistry existed. Into that vacuum, in 1976, the Personal Care Products Council, the industry's own trade lobbying association, established a panel called the Cosmetic Ingredient Review. The CIR, as it is known, was created to assess the safety of cosmetic ingredients. It is funded directly by the industry whose ingredients it evaluates. As of its own published records, it has reviewed over 4,000 ingredients. It has no enforcement power. It issues opinions. The companies are not required to follow them. In a 1990 report to Congress, the FDA itself acknowledged that it lacked the authority to require recalls of harmful cosmetic products, a structural limitation that would not be addressed for more than 3 more decades. Here is where the dark spot industry specifically becomes relevant. In the 1980s and 90s, hydroquinone became the dominant active ingredient in skin brightening and dark spot correction creams sold in the United States. By the early 2000s, hydroquinone was available over the counter in concentrations up to 2% in products sold at drugstores nationwide. In 2006, the FDA proposed a rule that would have reclassified over-the-counter hydroquinone products as potentially unsafe, citing concerns about a condition called achronosis, a paradoxical darkening of the skin, as well as carcinogenic potential in animal studies. That proposed rule was never finalized. The products remain on shelves. The market for skin brightening products in the United States was valued at over $4 billion annually by the mid-2000s. That is not a conspiracy. It is a documented regulatory failure with a named panel, a specific dollar market, and a year in which a protective action was proposed and quietly abandoned. The women who spent 30 years buying those products were not paranoid. They were correct. The European Union restricted the over-the-counter use of hydroquinone in cosmetics in 2001, limiting it to professional use only. The same regulatory divergence that allowed synthetic fragrance, a single word on a U.S. label that can represent hundreds of undisclosed compounds, a standard the EU moved against in 2003. Also kept hydroquinone in American medicine cabinets long after other regulatory bodies had concluded the risk-benefit calculus did not favor consumers. This is the context in which you should understand the Amish practice. It is not that the women of Lancaster County had access to peer-reviewed journals about tyrosinase inhibition. It is that they were never part of the system that replaced effective, inexpensive practices with patented, expensive ones. Their knowledge did not need defending because it was never under commercial threat. Now, the honest part. Because this channel does not sell you a story without telling you its edges. Raw apple cider vinegar is an acid. Its pH typically falls between 2.5 and 3.5. Applied undiluted, it can cause chemical burns, especially on skin that is already compromised, thinned by age, or sensitized by other products. The practice as it exists in these communities is always diluted, typically 1 part vinegar to 4 or 5 parts water, sometimes more dilute than that, depending on individual sensitivity. If you have rosacea, active broken capillaries, or any condition where your skin barrier is already disrupted, this is not the starting point for you. The acid will not help you, it will worsen what is already inflamed. Additionally, tyrosinase inhibition prevents new melanin from forming. It does not dissolve existing melanin deposits. For women with decades of accumulated hyperpigmentation already present, consistent use will prevent new spots and can gradually fade existing ones through cell turnover, but that turnover takes months, not weeks. If you are looking for something that reverses visible spots in 30 days, this is not the claim being made here. The Amish women who have even skin tones have them in large part because they never stop the practice long enough for the spots to accumulate. Prevention, not reversal, is the primary mechanism. The practice also becomes more effective when paired with what these communities do naturally without thinking about it. Minimal processed sugar, fat from whole food sources, no chronic contact with synthetic fragrance on the skin, and consistent sleep aligned with natural light cycles. You can isolate the apple cider vinegar rinse and it will still have measurable effect. But the women who show the most dramatic results are those for whom it is one consistent thread in a life that does not constantly wage war against the skin's regulatory systems. The raw apple cider vinegar used in these communities is the unfiltered, unpasteurized variety, the kind with what is called the mother still present, the colony of beneficial bacteria and enzymes that form naturally during fermentation. Pasteurization destroys those compounds. The clear filtered version sold in most grocery stores does not carry the same concentration of active components. This is not marketing language. The acetic acid is present in both, but the enzymatic complexity of the unpasteurized version is demonstrably different under analysis. The Amish women are not buying the filtered bottle. They are using what their communities produce or what is sold at local farm stores. These are not communities that invented this observation. Long before Old Order Amish settlements formed in North America in the early 18th century, variations of fermented acid rinses appear independently across cultures with no contact with each other. In ancient Egypt, vinegar preparations were documented in the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents, dated to roughly 1550 BCE, as treatments for skin conditions. Roman women in the 1st and 2nd centuries used diluted wine vinegar, documented by Pliny the Elder, as a facial treatment to maintain skin evenness. In traditional Japanese skincare, rice bran ferments and fermented sake lees served a closely related biochemical function, and the connection between fermented acids and controlled melanin production is a thread that runs through centuries of Japanese women's skincare practice. Ayurvedic texts make reference to sour ferments applied to the skin for evenness and clarity, a tradition with a documented history of over 2,000 years. The Amish did not discover this. They preserved it. That distinction matters because it means the knowledge was never the property of any single culture or any single moment. It belongs to human experience, and it was systematically set aside not because something better came along, but because something more profitable did. What has stayed with you from this? Was it the regulatory timeline that you already half suspected but never saw laid out in sequence? Was it the woman in Holmes County who has spent less than $2 a month for 30 years? Was it the fact that the mechanism being targeted by a $100 serum is the same mechanism addressed by a bottle you can find at any grocery store? Think about your own grandmother or your mother. Before the era of dark spot correctors, before the brightening peptide serums, before the retinol A creams, what did the women in your family use on their faces? What did they say about it? Those answers, for most women over 50, lead somewhere quieter and less expensive than what the last 3 decades have been selling. If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, and that the women who trusted the alternative got less than they deserved, you already know what to do. In the next video, we are going inside a specific practice that Old Order Amish women in Lancaster County have used for hair that does not thin after menopause. In 1994, a major American company filed a patent for the primary active compound in that practice. The patent was approved. The product that followed retailed for $68. The original source costs almost nothing. That story is next.